We'll go to our next presentation from University of Oklahoma. Dr. SHREYA VEMUGANTI is going to present on bond behavior of nano-enhanced polymer concrete for bridge deck overlays. Dr. VEMUGANTI.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction. My name is SHREYA VEMUGANTI. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Oklahoma in the Civil Engineering and Environmental Science Department. I'd like to acknowledge my both graduate students that are working on these tests and the project that is listed above, Haiba and Ali. The project that I would like to talk about today and also thank ABC-UTC for this opportunity is bond behavior of nano-enhanced polymer concrete for bridge deck overlays. So according to what you read here in the topic, it's clear that it's about bridge deck overlays, but really if we look into the definition of a structure and the deficiencies, when does a structure really be called as a deficient structure? There are some key structural elements out of which if even one of these elements is in a poor or worse condition and the bridge load rating turns out to point out to a particular structural element or many of them as deficient, then the structure is generally called as a deficient structure. In the country, we have about 260,000 bridges that are at least 50 years old, and of which 7.5% of the nation's bridges are considered structurally deficient. In Oklahoma, if you consider our state, there are in total about 23,138 bridges, out of which 10.2% were identified as structurally deficient in the year 2019. Just focusing our project completely on the deck itself, if you consider bridge decks, there is a lot of sources of deterioration and degradation in bridge decks. We have wet and dry conditions, there's UV affecting the bridge decks, of course with the de-icing salts and chloride ingress that harms the bridge decks. There's freeze and thaw conditions, especially with the changing climatic conditions. We see more number of freeze and thaw cycles in different states. And all this really affects the health of our bridge decks. And typically what is done is there are overlays that are used on these bridge decks that first minimize penetration of water, oxygen, chlorides, and de-icing salts. 2, protective barrier, they act as a protective barrier on top of the concrete bridge deck. And 3, they improve the deck performance and service life of the bridge deck. So in general, if you consider this bridge deck being more healthy, it will not be considered as one of the key elements of a structurally deficient structure. So we can rule that out. And of course, with traffic loads and increasing traffic loads, there is a lot of problem with bridge deck deterioration. In these overlays, there are several types of overlays that are used, but we're focusing our work on polymer concrete overlays, especially with its advantages that it offers, like wear resistance, skid resistance, corrosion resistance. It seals out the moisture, and it also has long-term durability. The advantages of polymer concrete overlays, particularly for accelerated bridge construction, they have rapid cure and they are very lightweight, so the handling becomes very easy, like you can see in this picture, where the short window and minimized traffic disruption of spreading this polymer concrete overlay over the bridge deck. They can be laid in small thicknesses, and this results in a very small dead load increase compared to other kinds of overlays. The major advantage other than all this is the high bond strength with the substrate. But like I said, there are varying problems and there are different kinds of traffic loads that we are now seeing and increasing in traffic loads. With the climatic conditions, there's shrinkage and environmental loads that are happening. And these freeze and thaw effects and corrosion can really affect this bond behavior of this overlay with the substrate concrete that is present. So our main hypothesis for this study is that when we consider this overlays, and it is a polymer-based overlays, Nanomaterials have seen to be improving bond performance in polymer-related materials. And so, due to their known mechanical effects and chemical changes on polymer systems, it is hypothesized for this study that nanomaterials can improve bond performance of this polymer concrete overlay with this underlying substrate of concrete that we have. And our main goal is to see if there is any chemical compounds that are created and there is any cross-linking happening that can help in this adhesion and durability of polymer concrete overlay systems. So our objective is to assess and inform bond performance of polymer overlay systems with incorporation of different quantities of nanomaterials. Of course, we are considering these tests in the laboratory test conditions currently, but hopefully we may be able to extend this into a field site. To suggest optimum mix designs and effective application is also the objective of the study, because eventually we want to be able to use this solution of polymer that can be added to the hardener, and polymerization can happen along with the substrate concrete that is there and improve its bond performance. So there are 5 tasks identified for this study. The first one being develop and validate polymer concrete mix design and the concrete substrate mix design. This is an extremely important step because unless we have a validated mix design for both these materials, we won't be able to get consistent results. The second task is develop an understanding of the pull-off tests. Now, pull-off tests, I will be explaining more in detail, but these are the essential ASTM tests that are used on site in order to evaluate bond performance and bond strength. The third task has been identified to maximize the effects of carbon nanotubes, and these are the nanomaterials that we have identified, so I will be talking about that in the next slides. The fourth task is the polymer concrete itself, how to nanomodify it, and also how to ensure that we have efficient dispersion of these nanomaterials into the polymer concrete mixture. The final task is, of course, evaluate the bond strength based on the same pull-off tests that we have developed an understanding of, and compare it to control mixes, and also summarize and report on our results. So we have had the opportunity to get through some preliminary results, and for project task 1, which is validating mixed designs of the overlay and substrate materials, we've come up with 2 mixed designs that have polymer concrete mixtures shown on the right side and a concrete cementitious mixture shown on the left side. Now, this mixture was validated using compression tests and modulus of rupture tests and flexural strength tests. So if we see the compressive strengths of both these materials, they are very close to each other, and that was our goal, to get materials that are close in compressive strengths. Now, polymer concrete is known to have higher tensile strength than regular cementitious concrete. So that was observed in our modulus of rupture tests that we saw. So the mix was definitely validated, and especially with consistent standard deviation and coefficient of variation. Looking at flexural strength results, that also we had pretty consistent data, and similar to what has been reported in literature for the amount of curing days that we had adopted. So we definitely have validated mixed designs for both the overlay and substrate materials. Coming to task 2, I talked about the ASTM 1583 pull-off tests. So if you see this particular test in ASTM, there are a couple of failure modes that are reported. This basically is the substrate material right on the bottom. I'm just going to use a pointer so that it helps identify. This substrate material has a overlay material shown here. They are bonded to a steel tensile loading device that is bonded using either a polymer system or other kinds of materials that are high adhesion materials. Now, the first failure mode that is shown in the ASTM standard is failure in the substrate itself. And when this happens, the tensile load that is obtained from the equipment of the pull-off test gives us the tensile strength in the concrete substrate. This is the bond failure at concrete and overlay interface. So for example, if you see this overlay and concrete interface right here, if there is failure in here, we report the tensile load and find out the bond strength itself. And then when there is failure in the overlay material, we report the tensile strength of the overlay material itself. The fourth failure mode is not a desirable failure mode, where the steel puck comes off of the overlay material itself. On the right, you can see a field test being conducted, which is a very predominant test of pull-off test ASTM 1583 on a bridge deck that has an overlay of UHPC and underlying concrete. For project task 2, it is also very important that we identify surface preparation characteristics. Now, the International Concrete Repair Institute proposes certain CSP levels, which is concrete surface prep levels. And for polymer overlays, particularly very thin polymer overlay systems, we have about CSP 5 to 9. And there are particular guidelines of how this surface preparation of 5 to 9 can be achieved. We are looking at thicker overlays, so we did many trials in finding out what is the surface preparation that we could be achieving to make sure there is enough bond. So our main criteria was to cast basically concrete substrate and polymer concrete overlay. So we made our mold of 8-inch by 8-inch dimensions, and it's 3.5 inches thick. Our concrete was casted in it after 1 day of demolding and then 1 other day of curing. We have a concrete substrate here before any surface preparation and then after surface preparation. On top of this, a polymer concrete overlay was casted. The dimensions were varied between 0.5 to 1.5 in order to study what kind of failure modes we will actually obtain. This is the polymer concrete surface after hardening. Before surface prep and after surface prep. We can see here the universal drilling machine that we have in Fierce Lab. This is essential to make cores in this particular specimen that we have that combines both the polymer concrete and the concrete substrate. These cores are essential based on the ASTM test. After the cores are made, the steel attachments, the tensile loading devices, are attached onto each of these cores. If you see the ASTM 1583 test, we have a pull-off device that is used. The one we have used is Hydrojoss 2000. The idea is to have this tensile loading device, which is the steel puck, which is the device right here, with the steel disc that is here attached to the overlay, which is basically the core consisting of overlay and the substrate material. There are some results that we obtained based on the thickness of the overlay that we changed. We saw failure in concrete substrates. So you can see here, this is the steel puck, this is the polymer concrete, and this is the concrete that was detached from the substrate itself. So you see some kind of concrete substrate failure. In the failure between substrate and overlay interface, so this is the steel puck, this is the polymer concrete, and this is the interface of that polymer concrete and the concrete. You see some concrete attached to the polymer concrete surface itself. And this is the failure in the polymer concrete overlay itself. So this is the steel puck to which some of the polymer concrete was attached during failure. So the ultimate test that we have now decided to stick to is, in order for us to evaluate bond performance between overlay and the substrate, we have decided on a 0.5-inch polymer concrete overlay. And based on that, we have done one test with 5 specimens, and all of them did fail at the polymer concrete and the concrete interface. Now, this will help us to get the result that we want, which indicates the bond strength of the polymer concrete and the concrete interface. Why that is helpful to us? Because when we modify this polymer concrete, we'll be able to understand how the bond strength changes with nano modification compared to the control mix without any nano modification. So this is the results that we have so far. Moving on to task 3, 4, and 5, which we are still investigating. we are identifying the exact amount and functionalization of carbon nanotubes that we would like to use. Now, based on my past work, I have identified that the carboxyl functionalized carbon nanotubes are very efficient in making some chemical interlocking. Of course, carbon nanotubes are one of the strongest materials that are available today, and they have significant effects on polymer resins, and it has been proved in past work. So our literature review is now being narrowed down to which exact percentage should we use in order to get the dispersion we require, but also the effects that we would desire. We want to, of course, maximize the effects of carbon nanotubes and its functionalization. So we have been looking in other works into scanning electron microscopy, and we see that we do get some good dispersion with our methods that we adopt for dispersion of CNTs in general with polymer matrices. And also we look at dispersion not only instantaneous, but also after a certain period of time, so that we ensure that our polymer material that has the CNTs in it has no segregation. And if we store it in cans and if we have to transport it to the site and use it there, we have that dispersion still significantly effective. Nanomodification process, which is the task 4 of the polymer concrete mix, we are using a process called 3-roll mill, and it's called a calendering technique. This includes addition of the polymer modified with CNTs. Essentially means the polymer is taken, the carbon nanotubes are added to it, and the shear mixing between these 3 rolls running at different angular velocities results in a homogeneous mix. This is from another published work that we have established good protocols with the gaps between the rolls. And this basically is the polymer resin that we would be adding to the polymer concrete mixture with the aggregate itself. Eventually, we end up with task 5, where we have to get to the polymer concrete mix, evaluate again the pull-off tests, but with this different nanomodification polymer resins. And after the bond performance evaluation, we want to compare it with the control mixes and see exactly how this bond performance is changing. But also we want to report on the texture of this polymer concrete with nanomodification, because in order to identify surface preparation, proper design approach and guidelines for the concrete surface prep. We have access with the microscope that we have at OU for good microscopic pictures, so that I think will help us in this study. So our final goal is to really just summarize approach and analysis, report on all the results that we've seen, and incorporate design guidelines into our final report to suggest on the methods and usage of this polymer concrete mix that is nanomodified for better bond performance. So I would like to thank, of course, Accelerated Bridge Construction and UTC for this opportunity, and all the students that are in this team currently, also the 2 students who are constantly working on this project, but also the other students who help and offer their assistance. We have a very dynamic team here, and our lab manager is extremely helpful in providing all the necessary things that we require. I would also like to thank our other partners of materials, especially, which are FIFE and Transpo, and OU affiliates, Dr. Jeffrey Bowles and Dr. Royce Floyd, because we are a very collegial team here, and we definitely share a lot of equipment, and we have very good expertise from them. Thank you all. And I would love to take some questions or any feedback that you might have.
Thank you very much, Dr. VEMUGANTI. Hopefully, it looks like in our next research day, we will have some good results from it. Can you, like in 10, 20 seconds, answer this question? What about you mentioned surface treatment, but can you refer to whether it's like aggregate or grooving, or how do you prepare the surface?
So for the surface preparation, ICRI itself has certain guidelines. For example, if we want to achieve CSP 5 level, what kind of grinding or what kind of surface blasting is required. For example, CSP7 requires some water jet blasting. This we are entirely talking about the concrete surface prep, meaning what surface prep does the concrete deck require before laying the polymer concrete overlay. So
yes.
that exactly that is what we are talking about. So
very good. So there is a good guideline in there. Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. VEMUGANTI.